Hello there, everyone. I hope you're doing well today. I am Elizabeth Corey. I'm the founder of beatingtrauma.com. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about trust, actually. So that's going to be our focus today is trust. So hopefully you will find this topic to be helpful for you. Trust is something that I often hear about from my clients where they will really be interested in the issues they have around trust. They'll be asking me how they could focus specifically on trust. And I am here to tell you that it works a little differently with trust. And so that's one of the reasons I want to talk about. So a lack of trust is a very normal response to relational trauma. And the truth about complex trauma is that it is almost always relational, right? It's not common for complex trauma to be, acute based on things like accidents or things, like that. Those can all be a part of our trauma. But for the most part, when we have complex trauma, it's going to be relational, and we're going to have experienced significant betrayals from people who were meant to take care of us. So this is automatically going to have a major impact to our ability to trust. Like, there is almost no way to avoid significant impacts when it comes to trust when we've experienced complex trauma. So, but here's the other truth, and this is maybe, it might sound unfortunate to you, but there's a good side to it also, which is that trust issues cannot be addressed on their own. We can't sit down and go, okay, today I'm just going to work on trust. Trust is going to be my primary thing that I'm going to focus on. Trust doesn't work that way because trust is literally a thread that permeates almost all of the trauma responses and survival skills we have in our system. On some level, they all have this foundation in trust. As we heal the emotions and the memories that are associated with our trauma, we do then begin to organically see changes in trust. That happens, again, quite organically based on our processing of emotions and memories from our traumatic experiences. That is really how we get back to trusting. All that said, it doesn't mean that it isn't helpful to see the ways in which we struggle to trust. Okay, I want to stress that's a very important thing, because the more awareness we build around trust, and the more we can see how maybe we don't always trust in our lives, the better we're going to be at seeing the sources of that. Because it's really those sources. It's really, and I will say a lot of it kind of comes down to that core fear, right? So if you're afraid, you're not trusting, right? Like that at its most core level is what we're after. But to see the ways we don't trust is, it's almost like, sometimes I like to say that this work is a bit of like a detective journey where we are actually attempting to see the signs of the fear, the signs of lack of trust that are happening through our behaviors and through our daily activities and interactions with others, because that helps us to kind of get more to what's underneath it. And that's really ultimately where we're trying to go. But when we think, oh, I'll just work on the trust, we're up here. We're in this frontal lobe. We're trying to make decisions that can affect our trust. And honestly, making decisions isn't really going to be what brings about the change to our trust. It's gotta hit where those emotions are, that fear underneath the surface. It's gotta hit there. That's where we can do the most significant change-making work that will impact our ability to trust in the long run. So I'm going to talk from a detective perspective about several of the ways in which we may be seeing a lack of trust show up with our parts. And I'm also going to refer to which parts tend to show this in our lives so you can get a sense for what might be there under the surface. So the first one is probably, I would guess that most of you are going to have some sign or symptom of this form of lack of trust in your system. I think it's the most common and it's also the most obvious to us because usually for most of us, we have a pretty special enmeshment with the controller. So the controller is a part I talk about a lot. In other texts, you might see this part referred to as the ego self. So this is going to be a part who often sounds the most like an adult in our system. They drive a lot of our thoughts. They live in the mind and they don't trust. Most of the time, if we have complex trauma, we're going to find that the controller does not trust. Now, that doesn't mean they can't act like they trust. They actually can. They're quite good at that. The controller has a lot of really powerful masks. But in general, the controller is not a trusting part. So you may be asking, well, what does it look like? What does it look like to have a controller that does not trust? And so I'm going to share that with you. I'm going to talk about what are some of those survival skills that a controller shows us that show a general lack of trust. And this can be about specific people. It very much can. But it can also be about society, about the universe, about God, about whatever it is you may believe in. The controller will often be showing a lack of trust. So how does that lack of trust show up? It usually shows up by never slowing down. Okay. So the controller is going to be the part that is often waiting for the other shoe to drop. They believe that if they can control everything that's happening in your life, that then they can kind of be on top of life. And the reason they need to control everything in life is because they don't trust life, right? And I can already hear all of your controllers saying, well, I mean, life has proven that it's not very trustworthy. I hear you. But I'm going to talk a little bit more later on about how we kind of perpetuate the patterns associated with lack of trust by actually, to some degree, creating them in our lives, which is why life does show us that we can't trust because we sort of, in a roundabout way, make it show us that because most of these parts that don't trust need to be right, even though needing to be right means not living your best life. I mean, and this is unfortunately when you hear the phrase, we are our own worst enemies, this is sort of where that comes from. We oftentimes will cling to the beliefs that we created in childhood to get through our complex trauma because we need to be right. Like actually being wrong about that creates a lot of emotions in our system. Emotions we do need to feel to heal, but that is something that many of our non-trusting parts do not want us to recognize at all. So the controller is definitely one of those parts. So they will control, hence the name. They are always attempting to stay on top of anything and everything that can go wrong. They will do this by never slowing down, running us into the ground, doing all the things all day long for letting you relax. I don't know if you're anything like me. You sit down and the next thing you know, your mind just won't shut off. It's like you're ruminating, you're obsessing, you're thinking. I call these spin cycle, right? Because you're looking for what's gonna go wrong next. Okay, this is the controller in a nutshell. Also, because the controller generally doesn't trust others, and I mean in the form of people, although they will make it appear that they do. The controller's lack of trust can also show up as a fierce independence. Okay, controllers, highly independent. They really don't want to lean on or rely on others to do anything in particular for them. They will stay highly independent. I don't know if you've ever lived by this notion of if you want it done right, do it yourself, but that is definitely a controller survival skill that comes directly from not being able to trust anybody when you were a child. Okay, and that's where all of this does start, by the way. So that's a little bit about how the controller's lack of trust will show up in our lives. There are many, many other ways, but just to give you a sense of, maybe you have that controller who doesn't really trust based on that information. So the next way in which we can see a lack of trust in our life is actually coming from the karma kid. Now, the karma kid and the controller's lack of trust doesn't always look really, really different, but oftentimes the karma kid's version will be a bit more intense. As a matter of fact, the fear of the karma kid will often look a bit like paranoia. Excuse me. So, paranoia is something that is deeply stigmatized in our society, as you may be well aware. But it isn't necessarily always wrong. It may be wrong right now, maybe not, but it's almost never wrong when you consider the past. Paranoia builds in our system. It is definitely coming from a lack of trust, and it is definitely coming from fear. But it builds in our system when we grow up in an environment where people are pretty committed to sabotaging the very things that we in fact do want in our lives. You might be thinking, why would people do that? You might not. You might know exactly what I'm talking about. But if you are thinking, why would people do that? It usually comes from a place of needing to ensure you do not develop significant confidence. Because if you do, that usually means that you're going to fight back against whatever kind of abusive situation you find yourself in. So this kind of sabotage of the things that you want are going to impact your confidence. They're going to impact your futility levels. And by that, I mean, it's going to make you feel hopeless. And that's going to keep you from trying to fight back and get out of whatever kind of controlling and abusive pattern you may be in the middle of as a child. So paranoia develops because every time you think you've found something, it's going to give you some kind of joy or confidence or, really help you move towards a purpose that feels really good to you, you're going to find that it just doesn't work out. And sometimes it's going to be really obvious that people were sabotaging it, and other times it's not going to be obvious that other people were sabotaging it, but the truth is likely other people were, in fact, sabotaging it. Because this is what happens when families need you to be broken so that you are not a danger to them. And the more of a danger you seem to pose, and by that I mean maybe you're extroverted or confident, or you speak your mind a lot, or you question things, then you're going to be more likely to move into that sort of scapegoated role where people really do target you. And that sabotage just goes up 15 notches when we're in that situation. And I have a feeling for most of the people that follow me, you might have fallen into that kind of a category, because those of us who find our way towards this kind of a journey, we often are those people. We are the people who are just like, I don't like any of this and I'm willing to talk about it. We're those people. Now, that doesn't mean you did it for your entire childhood. At some point, these kind of families do often achieve what they're looking for, which is to kind of break you. But in adulthood, there is a level of safety and freedom we can often find enough to where we can begin to challenge again those belief systems are given. But the karma kid is one who will sit there in the background and tell us there is no point, because it's never getting any better, and because there will always be ways in which everything you try to do is sabotage. And that is what often becomes labeled as paranoia and seen as even crazy, when in fact it's really accurate based on the way we were raised. So that's going to be your karma kid. They do not trust. They're always looking for punishment, sabotage, things to go wrong. And they sit in a lot of futility because of their lack of trust. And they actually even will drive depression for us. Something to think about. Depression can be a sign also of a lack of trust. As can anxiety, which does come from the controller. Peter believes nobody in the world can be trusted. Now, they came by this view quite honestly. And so it isn't fair to make them, to kind of epitomize them as totally ungrounded all the time. Because I would say that there are plenty of people in the world who cannot, in fact, be trusted. This is not wrong when it comes to the people oftentimes that we grew up with. However, the isolator does extract that to the rest of the world, right? And they're like, just stay away from everybody. Just live on your own. On your own is the only way that you can be sure that you're safe and that you're not in a position where you're going to be taken advantage of and that you can be in some level of trust. Now, there is another side to this, though, which is the reason the isolator doesn't trust others is because the isolator doesn't trust self. It's not that they don't trust all of self. They have specific parts they don't trust, okay? These parts are the controller, the love seeker, and the karma kid. And I'm going to talk more about the love seeker in a minute because that one manifests a little differently. But the truth is that the isolator doesn't trust these parts in relationship with others because most of the time when these parts are in relationship with others, they don't have any boundaries. Now, all three of those parts have different reasons for not having boundaries. They're not all the same, but generally they don't have them, which means the isolator has discovered that the only real way you can be okay in the world, and by okay, they mean safe, authentic, free, all those things, is to be on your own. Because the minute somebody shows up, those three parts are going to make life all about that person and you're going to lose yourself. Now, to some degree, the isolator is right. At least when we are going through many of our initial phases of recovery where we're getting to know these parts and how they operate in the world, it's very easy to lose ourselves in others because honestly, we've been doing it our entire lives. Like this is the habit. But the more that you get to know yourself, which often does happen through some bit of isolation as a part of our recovery process, you can then begin to let people in and set boundaries. And the more boundaries you set with others, the more the isolator backs down. But they will be very quick to jump back up if they feel like this person is starting to take advantage of us and of our parts or of our lack of boundaries. So, isolator, not a truster at all. But again, they do have their reasons, as do all these parts. All these parts have their reasons not to trust. Okay, I want to be very clear about that. Now, let's talk a little bit about how we perpetuate trust cycles that lead us to keep proving ourselves right. Because this is how we kind of get stuck, okay? And now there are many parts that perpetuate trust cycles. And this, I want to call this ungrounded trust, okay? Ungrounded trust is trust for no reason, okay? This person has not earned our trust. The two biggest parts that perpetuate this kind of cycle through ungrounded trust are going to be your love seeker and your karma kid. Those are going to be the big parts that perpetuate these cycles for us. And when we perpetuate these cycles, we teach ourselves that not trusting is in fact correct. Grounded trust is not something we should be continuing to engage in. Ungrounded trust usually comes, for example, I'll give you some examples. For example, the love seeker has decided to pedestal somebody. I like to refer to it as putting somebody up on a pedestal. This person has not established the history or the repeated trustworthy behavior to be put on said pedestal, yet they are in fact on said pedestal. When we pedestal somebody, which is a normal love seeker behavior when the love seeker is ungrounded, we are already setting ourselves up for failure. And the problem isn't always even that the other person is particularly untrustworthy. They may be. It's definitely very possible. A lot of times it's that they've been put on such a high pedestal that there's no chance that a human being could actually meet those standards that they've been they're being held against, I will say. So it may be that they're just being human. Now, it may be that they are being untrustworthy, and that's something we need to unpack when we get into situations like this. But it's that pedestaling behavior is something that we want to be very careful of, and it is often coming from that love seeker or coming from that karma kid who is saying, look at this amazing person over here. They're amazing. They're doing all the right things. They're such a great person. They're going to be my savior, right? Which is the love seeker thing. They're going to rescue me from my traumatic history, from the patterns I've been in, from my life, and then everything will be okay. These are messages that mean we've moved into an ungrounded trust scenario. And it means that we will, in fact, generally end up heartbroken and with yet another example of why we can't trust coming out of it. So in breaking some of these ungrounded trust situations, stopping that pattern, stopping the pedestaling behavior that comes from the love seeker, we will then begin to kind of bring some of these patterns like down a few notches, which then helps us begin to develop trust. But the truth is, the way that we develop trust through breaking these patterns is actually by trusting ourselves. So instead of pedestaling a person, saying, okay, well, you know what? I can give this person a chance to prove themselves. I can set some boundaries with this person. I can let this person be a part of my life unless they prove that it's not a good idea, in which case I won't. These are self-trusting behaviors that come as we ground. And these are the ways in which we can begin to trust others because we have begun to trust ourselves. Our parts are working together more. They're not in constant turmoil and constant fighting with each other. So we can say, okay, I can make these decisions and I know that they're going to be somewhat right for me, right? So that is really the goal of working on trusting, getting to a place where we can trust a little bit more. And in that process, we will start to see that fear come down many, many, many notches over time, and the trust in general start to move up. So that is what I have for you today. I hope you guys found this helpful. I'm really happy my voice held up because it has not been doing super awesome the last 10 days or so. But thank you all so much for being here. And please let me know if you ever have any questions about this, or if you want to work on developing new patterns, new relational patterns, or patterns with the universe, or whatever it may be, to build trust, which I will say does make it a much more peaceful life in general, then please do feel free to contact me. I have a few openings for new clients, so send me an email. I'm here, and I would love to work with you on this topic or really any other topic that's coming out of your personal traumatic experiences and complex trauma. So thank you all, and I will talk to you next week. I will see you then. Bye.